Hi guys, welcome back to Jack's Vlogs. In today's video I want to talk a little bit about the camera that I've been using to record the first lot of my YouTube videos with. It's the camera that's on the tripod now, the Canon EOS 6D. This camera first came out around 8 years ago now, so it is fairly old tech. It does have quite a cool few features, and when I bought it in 2015 it was a good camera for the price. I think it was £1,300 or $1,500 then if you're in the US. It was a good price to get into full frame photography and things like that. I never actually intended on using it much for video. There's a few reasons for that which I'll get onto later in this video, but I want to talk to people if they're looking to buy a DSLR camera. Is it a good camera to buy in 2020 given the amount of new tech and the capabilities of cameras nowadays are so good? Is it still worth buying something like a 60 which you can get for relatively cheap online? Let's get into the video. Now, first of all, before we get into this camera in more specific detail, I would like to apologise if the sound quality isn't great today. I've actually forgotten my lavalier mic. It's not at home with me, so the microphone or the sound that you're going to be hearing is coming straight out of the internal mic on the 60, but hey, at least it'll be a good test. I would like to say that I've not written any notes down or anything like that. I'm literally going to be doing this video on the fly. There's a few points in my head that I would like to go to for people that are looking to buy this camera, having used it for 4 years and being my sole camera. So let's get into the video. Now, the first thing I would like to talk about is the weight of this camera. I'm not entirely sure on the exact weight. I'm going to put that in the video right now, but it is a heavy camera. It sort of probably is the same weight as other DSLR cameras of the time, the same sort of design and capabilities and things like that. They are quite heavy cameras, the full frame cameras, at least ones of that era, and especially if they're the old style mirrored cameras, not mirrorless like you get nowadays. So it is a heavy camera. If you put a 24-70 lens on it, which is a lens from Sigma that I use on the camera most of the time, it's an f2.8 lens. The camera can become very difficult for vlogging. It is very heavy. I think, you're talking 1.5 kilos, I think 1,500 grams for the lens and the camera. So if you're holding the camera, in the palm of your hand or on a selfie stick, your hand is going to hurt after a while, and mine certainly does, and having to do retakes on videos and things like that can be very difficult. Now, you can use obviously a tripod or prime lenses. I've got the camera on a tripod now using the 50mm 1.8 lens from Canon, the nifty 50 as people call it. It's not too heavy with a 50mm lens with a smaller prime lens, but that's obviously going to be unusable for holding out in front of you getting those sorts of shots, so that's one thing to bear in mind. The next thing I want to talk about is the batteries. Now, the batteries do actually last for quite a long time, especially compared to today's mirrorless cameras. If you're doing photography as opposed to videography, you will get, 3 or 4 hours of on and off shooting. It is a longer lasting battery than what you're going to get in the mirrorless cameras nowadays, which is good. I've never had many issues with the batteries. I think they last a fair amount of time. I couldn't tell you exactly how long, but they do last a fair while, whether you're using them for video or photography. That is one thing to consider if you're doing lots of vlogging. Not having to change the batteries all the time is always a huge bonus, and yeah, I'm happy with the batteries, which is always good. You can buy cheap alternative batteries, to have a collection and keep them fully charged as well. The batteries are fairly cheap now, which is good. I try and use the Canon one, which is in the camera now, as much as possible. I like to keep that charged. I try not to use the cheaper alternatives too much, just in case. But I've never had any issues with the batteries. The batteries, all good. So next I want to talk about image quality for those people that are going to be looking to use this as a vlogging camera. Now you have to remember that the camera is an old camera. It was brought out in 2012, I think, something like that. Technology, you know, wasn't at its best back then. It was sort of, everything was moving towards the full HD picture for video and things like that. 4K was very unheard of at that time. Now, in terms of the option for the highest quality in movie recording, the highest quality that you can set it to is 30 frames a second in full HD 1080, which is what I'm shooting at now. That is literally it. There is no frame rate higher that you can access for the 60. So you're not going to get 60 frames a second full HD. To be honest, I quite like the look of the 24 frames a second video. It sort of gives that classic sort of, you know, TV look. I think everything starts to look a bit unnatural at 60 frames a second. It's weird. I personally prefer the lower frame rate, but other people might not. I do think it can shoot, don't quote me on this, I will check for the video, but I do think it can shoot 60 frames a second at 720, which is pretty much useless in this day and age. So 1080p, full HD at 30 frames a second is the cap for the camera's recording capabilities, and that's something you need to consider if you want to be keeping up with, you know, all the 4K hype and things like that nowadays. Okay, moving on now, the next thing that I would like to talk about is the auto-focusing system, or the lack of, should I say. Now, if you're using the camera as a photography camera, I think there's around 8 or 9 autofocus points. It is very limited, you know, in terms of even like the 5D Mark III. The lack of autofocus points can be quite annoying if you're trying to get creative shots and things like that. I've sort of learned to work with it, but it does feel a little bit outdated, especially till you know, all these mirrorless cameras that have thousands of autofocus points now, face tracking and things like that. And that's another thing to mention for when you're shooting video on this camera as well. The camera does not have live autofocusing capabilities. So once you've focused your frame and you hit the record button, the camera is locked on focus. You can still change the focus manually, but the autofocus, that's it. Once the autofocus has found the frame and locked onto the focus, if you move, you know, closer to the camera, if I move closer like now, I'm not going to be in focus because the focus doesn't move, and obviously same if I move further back as well. So that is probably for me the biggest drawback for the video on the 6D, the lack of autofocus capabilities. To be honest, the autofocus isn't great before you've even hit the record button. You know, getting your frame in focus with video mode can sometimes, you know, the focus is dragging quite substantially a lot of the time. So that for me is the biggest drawback with this camera, the lack of live auto focusing. That's one of the reasons that I'm looking to upgrade to a newer camera, to be honest. So moving on from the auto-focusing part of the camera, I would like to talk a little bit about lenses. That sort of just reminded me to talk about that. Now, in terms of lenses, I only have actually got 2 lenses for this camera, believe it or not. I've got the 24-70 2.8, which is the Sigma variant of the Canon lens. It's been a great lens, actually, to be fair. Certainly a lot cheaper than the Canon lens. Now, this is another thing to consider. With it being a full-frame camera and sort of Canon's higher-end tier of cameras, the lenses are significantly more expensive to buy. Even the Sigma 24-70, which is the old Sigma 24-70 lens, the OG, if people know anything about lenses, that still was, I think, £600 when it was new. The Canon variant at the time was £1,300. And then I think the Mark II came out, which was even more expensive. So the lenses are expensive, and that's one thing to consider. It's not like the Canon EFS lenses for the crop sensor cameras, which are, you know, a lot cheaper, and you can't put the EFS lenses on this camera, unfortunately, because that would be perfect, but you can't do that, and the lenses are expensive. So, you know, if you're going to be wanting a nice wide shot, maybe, you know, 16 to 35, 16mm will be much wider than the other lens I've been using, then it's going to be very expensive. That is one thing to consider. If you need a few lenses for this camera, you can be racking, or even second-hand prices, racking up the cost pretty significantly very quickly. Now, one sort of small little feature that I do like about this camera, the auto mic level on this camera seems to be really good. It seems to get the level just right. So obviously, depending on how far away or how close you're sat to the camera, it will raise the volume to get a nice sort of level, obviously without distorting and things like that. So the mic level is on auto now. I might put a little effect on it in Final Cut to boost the volume a little bit. Yeah, the auto mic level feature is nice to have as well. And as you can hear, the internal microphone isn't terrible. It is usable, but a lav mic is always going to be better. But yeah, the mic's okay for general vlogging, I'd say. If you're shooting low light video, this camera, is not as good as the latest cameras in terms of the processing for the low light video, but it is definitely up there with, especially cameras at the time. If you were to use, something like a GoPro or something with a small sensor and you're doing night shots, or vlogging in the dark and you needed that extra sort of low light capability, this camera is going to give you that, which is nice. It is very good in low light for photography and perfectly usable doing videos, vlogs and things like that. It's certainly going to be better than some of the crop sensor cameras nowadays, even the more expensive ones, because literally of the full frame sensor. Image stabilization, that's another important thing that we quickly need to cover as well. There is no inbuilt image stabilization in the Canon 6D, so if you're buying this camera to use as a selfie vlogging camera, if you're going to be using it on the fly, walking around with it in your hands, or on a selfie stick or anything like that, you're going to need a lens which is image stabilized to get sort of a shot that's half usable. Both of the lenses, the 50mm that I've got on the camera and the 24-70 doesn't have image stabilization, which is why some of my videos are quite jumpy. Okay, so I thought it'd be just a good idea to give everyone an idea of the footage that this camera will get if you're walking around and things like that, and how smooth it is. So the setting is on auto currently, just so I can run and gun with it. This is how far I'm holding it away from my face. As you can see, I've got quite big hands, and it is quite big, it's very heavy. To be honest, I couldn't hold this for much longer than 2 minutes at a time, because it simply hurts my arm so much, simply because of the weight on it. So just before we get onto the final part of the video, the last thing that I'd like to talk about is the connections on the side. The camera, which a lot of these compact cameras seem to be lacking nowadays, is a microphone input. Now on the side of the 6D, it does have a 3.5mm jack, so you can use an external lavalier mic, or you can even get a mic which goes straight on top of the camera on the hot shoe on top, like the Rode mics and things like that, to get much better sound quality. So that's always a nice thing to have. Very important as well. There is also a mini HDMI output as well, so if you want to sort of have a preview screen, it will output a smaller resolution. I'm pretty sure it's not 1080, but you'll get some sort of preview window, so you could hook your camera up to an external monitor to have as a monitor camera if you're shooting in a studio environment or things like that as well, which is nice. In terms of storage, the camera uses a conventional SD card. It does need to be class 10 or higher to record full HD image, just simply because of the bitrate of the videos. The file sizes are quite large, and you do get fairly good video quality out of the camera in return, which is nice. The camera also has Wi-Fi capabilities too, so you can basically create a network on the camera and then send photos directly to your phone using the Canon app, or videos and things like that, which is also nice to have. So the Wi-Fi capabilities are nice. Unfortunately, you can't use the Wi-Fi as a video controller, or to use as a video assistant to focus and things like that, because you can't use Wi-Fi and movie recording at the same time, which is a little bit of a shame really. I think given the price point of these cameras at the minute in the UK, I was looking on eBay, you can pick them up for, I think the cheapest one on there was £400, better condition models maybe £700, but then obviously you've got the price of the lenses on top, which you need to budget for, because as a starting setup, even with used equipment, you can be talking well over £1,000. In terms of pure performance and value for money, I do think the camera is up there with the other cameras. You are still getting a full frame sensor. You can't beat, a full frame DSLR look, especially if you want an out of focus background and things like that. That is easily achievable. The camera will get fairly decent video in low lights as well, and if you're taking photos with it, hopefully you will, because the sensor in this camera is so good for the price. Quickly before I end the video, I do want to say as well, I actually dropped this camera. We took it to Iceland with us to take some photos, and I actually had the camera in my hand. I never use a strap, I should do really, but I had my fingers around the grip of the camera with the 24-70 lens on it, and I actually fell on ice and smashed the camera into the ground. There's a little mark under the camera. It didn't really do any damage, but the camera actually saved me from breaking my wrist, believe it or not, because the way my wrist landed on top of the camera, if I'd have hit the ground, it would have hit it a lot harder, and I'd have definitely been leaving Iceland with a broken wrist. So in terms of build quality, it's a solid 10 out of 10, definitely. So there you go. I hope this video has been of some use to you. If you'd like any help at all, if you're looking to buy this camera or buy any cameras, I can help you out with the knowledge that I know. If you're a bit rock and roll like me, don't want to look at all the boring specs and things like that, but you want a real world opinion on it, then by all means drop a comment in the comment section below. I'm always happy to try and help people out. I'll reply to as many comments as I can, if not all of them. And please do subscribe to the channel as well. That will help me out massively. Hit the bell icon, and then hopefully if the channel gets some more subs and some more views on the videos, I can look at upgrading this camera, or maybe probably keep it, but upgrade it, get a 4K camera and improve the quality for the end of 2020 as well. Once again, thanks for watching and stay safe.